Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are jumping into Vienna around 1900. It wasn't just a place, it was this incredible intellectual hothouse, really, where our modern ideas about the human mind started to take shape.
It really was an explosive time. You had art, medicine, psychology all kind of bumping up against each other, and they were all driven by this shared focus, almost a revolutionary. Forget the surface, let's look underneath, into the unconscious.
Yeah, and our mission today is to unpack that, to take this amazing Austrian moment and trace its intellectual lineage right up to modern neuroscience.
Exactly. We're connecting Freud's ideas, those sometimes shocking expressionist paintings, to what we now know about the biology of how you, the viewer, process art, emotion, vision.
So the big question is, how did this Viennese obsession with the inner world lay the groundwork for understanding the mind in, well, biological terms?
What?
Especially focusing on what happens in your brain when you look at art.
It's a fascinating story, a real deep dive into mind, art, and how we're wired.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Vienna itself was changing dramatically. Back in 1857, they started tearing down the old city walls.
Right, to build the Ringstrasse, that grand boulevard. And this wasn't just about architecture. It physically connected the wealthy inner city with the often poorer, more diverse suburbs. It forced a mixing.
And that physical change kind of mirrored a social one, didn't it? Travel restrictions were lifted around 1870.
Yeah, and that led to this huge influx of people, a lot of talent, especially Jewish scholars, scientists, artists. They brought new ideas, challenged the old ways. It was this blend of high and low culture, science, and art that really fueled modernism.
And science, specifically medical science, was really setting the intellectual pace. You had the Second Vienna School of Medicine.
Hugely important. They championed this systematic biological view of disease. You had to connect what you saw in the clinic with what you found in the autopsy. Clinical pathological correlation, they called it.
Basically, look beneath the surface to find the real cause.
Exactly. And that idea, that mandate, look below the surface for the truth, it just permeated everything. It started with doctors and dissection, but suddenly artists, writers, thinkers were all applying that same principle to the mind, to society.
And these ideas weren't stuck in lecture halls or labs. They were bouncing around in the city's salons, like Berta Zuckerkandl's famous salon.
Right. These were crucial meeting places. You had scientists, artists, writers, journalists, all mingling, people who might not normally interact in, say, London or Paris at the time.
And there's direct evidence of crossover, isn't there? Berta Zuckerkandl, she was an art critic, and her husband Emil was a top anatomist.
Yeah, and they actually tutored Gustav Klimt, the painter, in biology and Darwinian thinking. It shows how fluid the boundaries were. The walls between disciplines were really coming down.
Okay, so Darwin, that biological perspective is sort of the launchpad for Freud, right?
Yeah.
Darwin's Origin of Species changed how people saw humanity.
Absolutely. Suddenly, we weren't these unique, divinely created beings. We were biological creatures, driven by instincts. And that meant things like sex and aggression, these core survival instincts, became legitimate subjects for, well, scientific inquiry.
And that's where Freud steps in. I mean, philosophers had kicked around the idea of the unconscious before him.
They had, yeah. Plato, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, they all touched on it. But Freud did something different. He built the first systematic theory of mind around it. He treated our messy inner lives as something you could study empirically. It was really a precursor to cognitive psychology.
So if we boil Freud's massive contribution down, what are maybe the three big ideas that still resonate most strongly with modern neuroscience?
Okay, three key ones. First, the idea that most of our mental life, especially our emotional life, is actually unconscious. We're often driven by things we don't fully grasp or can't even articulate.
Right. We're not always in the driver's seat consciously.
Exactly. Second, that core instinctual drives, specifically for sex and aggression, are basically hardwired. They're part of our genome, essential for survival and propagation.
Okay. And the third?
The third is maybe the most radical for its time, but widely accepted now, that normal mental life and mental illness aren't separate categories. They exist on a continuum.
So mental breakdowns are often extreme versions of normal processes.
Precisely, just intensified, exaggerated forms of how our minds usually work.
And he didn't just theorize this stuff abstractly. He used himself, his own mind, as a kind of laboratory.
Yeah.
The famous dream of Irma's injection is a case in point.
Oh, definitely. He had this dream after a patient, Emma Eckstein, had surgical complications. He felt incredibly guilty because he'd recommended the surgeon. His analysis of the dream showed him he was dealing with that guilt by, well, blaming others, the surgeon, even Emma herself.
And that intense self-analysis led him to a core discovery.
Yes, that's where he really pinned down the idea of wish fulfillment as the engine of dreams. He saw dreams as this way the mind tries to resolve conflicts and satisfy desires, even unpleasant ones like deflecting guilt. It came from rigorously looking inward.
Okay, so this intense digging into the hidden self, it wasn't just happening in consulting rooms. The artists were doing it too.
Absolutely. The Vienna School of Art History even argued that the modern artist's job wasn't about beauty anymore. It was about revealing new truths about this inner psychological world.
And in literature, you had Arthur Schnitzler doing just that.
Right. Schnitzler was amazing. He pioneered the interior monologue. Think of his story, Lieutenant Gussel. He just writes down everything the character's thinking, stream of consciousness style, even the petty, anxious stuff. You're right inside the character's head.
And Freud's reaction to Schnitzler's incredible.
It really is. Freud basically admitted he felt Schnitzler was his double, his rival, almost. He wrote that Schnitzler seemed to know intuitively through, like, delicate self-observation, everything Freud himself was uncovering through painstaking scientific work.
The artist got there first, in a
In
way.
a way, yes. And Schnitzler's portrayal of women, particularly the süße Mädel, the sweet young girl type, often from a lower class having an affair, was really insightful. He didn't just make her a stereotype. He explored her inner life, her anxieties, her desires with real depth, showed the complexity beneath the social mask.
So moving to the visual artists, Gustav Klimt was really the first major Austrian modernist to tackle these taboo subjects head-on, visually. Female sexuality, aggression.
Yes. His drawings especially are incredibly intimate. They feel like insights into women's inner states. But even his famous paintings, like the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, The Burst,
A woman in gold.
that one, it perfectly captures that Viennese tension. You have this quite realistic rendering of her face, her expression, but then her body is enveloped in this incredibly ornate, abstract, golden pattern.
It's like the ornamentation is a beautiful disguise.
Exactly. It's like the public facade, the decorative surface, concealing this complex, maybe turbulent inner reality. The psychological depth is hinted at, but veiled.
But the next generation, they just ripped that veil off, didn't they? Like Oscar Kokoschka.
Oh yeah, Kokoschka explicitly broke with Klimt's style. He saw his Expressionism as a direct parallel, even a rival to Freud's psychoanalysis. He wanted to paint the psyche directly.
Soul painting, he called it.
Right. He used distortion, really jarring, unnatural colors, exaggerated features, especially faces and hands. He wasn't trying to capture a likeness. He was trying to make the sitter's internal conflicts visible on the canvas, painting the feeling.
And then Egon Schiele takes it even further, arguably.
Definitely. Schiele used the entire body as the raw material for expression. His self-portraits are famous, often nude, emaciated-looking, twisted into these agonizing poses.
It's like raw emotion, anxiety, guilt, desires, literally contorting the body.
Exactly. He's exploring that fundamental tension Freud talked about between the life drive, eros, and the death drive, thanatos. It's all laid bare physically.
Okay, so this intense focus by the artists on how the viewer reacts psychologically, that leads us back towards the science, right?
It does, because art historians in Vienna, figures like Riegel, Chris, Gombrich, they started thinking systematically about the viewer's role. They developed this idea that art is often ambiguous.
Meaning the viewer has to actively participate.
Precisely. The artwork isn't complete on its own. The viewer unconsciously recreates the image, fills in the gaps based on their own emotions, their own life experiences.
They called it the beholder's share. I like that phrase. It's not passive consumption. You're contributing your own share to the meaning.
It's a collaborative act, in a sense. And what's amazing is that this intuition from art history is now completely validated by modern neuroscience. We know vision isn't like a camera passively recording reality.
It's an act of construction.
Right. Our brain is constantly interpreting, making inferences based on what it expects to see. It heavily relies on what's called top-down processing.
Top-down meaning our memories and expectations influence what we perceive.
Exactly. Your brain makes hypotheses about the incoming sensory data. Think about those classic optical illusions, like the duck rabbit. The image on the page doesn't change at all.
But you see either a duck or a rabbit. You can't see both at once.
Right. Your perception flips. That's your brain changing its interpretation, its top-down hypothesis, about the same bottom-up visual information. And that switching often happens unconsciously.
So the Expressionists, focusing on faces and bodies, were tapping into something fundamental about how our brains work.
They absolutely were. We know now that face perception is special. We don't see features in isolation, an eye here, a nose there. We perceive the face as a whole configuration, a gestalt percept.
But our brains are also really sensitive to exaggeration, aren't they? Things that deviate from the norm.
Highly sensitive. There's this concept called the enhancement effect, or supernormal stimulus. A biologist, Nico Tinbergen, famously showed this with gull chicks. They'd peck more vigorously at a fake beak with 3 exaggerated red stripes than at their own mother's actual beak, which had paler markings.
So the exaggeration grabbed attention more powerfully than reality.
Exactly. And caricature, or the distortions used by artists like Kokoschka and Schiele, works the same way on us. When Kokoschka wildly exaggerates a hand or Schiele draws a mouth stretched in a scream, it's like that enhanced stimulus. It bypasses some of the normal processing and hits us with this immediate, strong emotional response.
And now we know the brain circuitry involved.
We do. There are specific areas in the brain, in the temporal lobe, that are specialized for recognizing faces. And these areas are tightly connected, hardwired to our emotion centers, like the amygdala.
So when an artist uses exaggeration, they're essentially hijacking that pathway. They're directly stimulating the emotional response via the visual system.
That's a good way to put it. They're leveraging the brain's natural sensitivity to trigger that top-down emotional interpretation.
So bringing this all together, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive? It sounds like these Austrian modernists, Freud, Schnitzler, Klimt, Kokoschka, Schiele, were kind of like intuitive cognitive psychologists.
I think that's fair to say. They really had this practical, almost visceral understanding of how our brains process faces, bodies, emotions, long before we had the tools like fMRI to actually see it happening.
It's a powerful connection. And it really speaks to that original Viennese medical idea. Looking deeper enhances understanding. Analyzing art scientifically, understanding the reductionist biological basis.
It doesn't diminish the art at all. If anything, it deepens our appreciation. Knowing how our brain creates that feeling of unease or empathy when looking at a Schiele self-portrait makes the experience richer, not poorer. It's like understanding how a heart pumps doesn't make us admire it less.
Right. It adds another layer of wonder, really.
Which leads to maybe a final thought to chew on. If art isn't just, a cultural frill, but maybe something deeper, an evolutionary adaptation, what's its purpose? Why are our brains seemingly wired for it?
That's a big question. Any speculation?
Well, one idea is that art, maybe like storytelling, could be an instinct, a way for us to safely simulate complex social situations or environmental challenges in our minds.
Like a mental playground.
Sort of. When you engage with a challenging piece of art, maybe a Kokoschka portrait that makes you feel conflicted, you're not just looking at paint. You're practicing interpreting complex emotional cues, understanding another person's potential state of mind, all in a low-stakes environment.
So art as a way to hone our social survival skills.
It's a possibility. A way to improve our understanding of others, which is absolutely crucial for navigating our intensely social world, something to think about.